between Turkey and Armenia on Turkish soil to produce an exhibition which focuses on a very contested part of heritage. But I would like to begin with some more sort of meta perspectives. Addressing built heritage can only be done if we understand it as expression of our identities, who we are, our similarities, our differences, and our hybridity. We've been discussing this very much today. Many of the papers have dealt with hybridity and counted sort of simplified narratives about who we are. How do you make something which is complex or composed? How do you simplify that? How to produce difference? You might draw up a border and you might start to edit the landscape of those who build triangles and those who build circular monuments can be edited in a way that you gradually end up with something which is obviously not similar. And that can feed antagonisms. You can omit part of a multi-layered story and just extract what you think is compatible with the identity you want to build, and then get rid of what you don't like in order to deny the presence of certain identities in the territory which is disputed. This is a technique which has been done, been practiced in many places through history, through nation-building projects, for instance. So I'm going now to address the more specifics of the Ottoman Empire, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire during the First World War. It became defeated by the sort of long grinding effect, combining forces of competing empires and national uprisings. So national uprisings sort of fragmented the Ottoman Empire. And in that context, most of the Armenian subjects of the Ottoman Empire became victims to ethnic cleansing. There's a picture from 1915 where Armenians are marched out of the Ottoman, the places in Anatolia they used to inhabit, and brought into the Syrian desert, where many of them died on the way or in the desert. After having got rid of, we can say it that way, most of its Armenian subjects, there remained, of course, in Anatolia, in the new Turkish Republic, which was born after the First World War, a lot of Armenian heritage, a lot of sites that reminded of the many thousands of years of Armenian inhabitants of eastern Anatolia and other parts of Anatolia as well. So this is a monastery which is near the present-day Armenian border, but on the Turkish side of the border. It's called Kichkonk, and it consisted at the beginning of the 20th century of 5 churches and some other buildings. Today it looks like this. Just one building standing, and that's it bears the marks of artillery rounds being fired at it, and in my mind there's no doubt that this was one of the monuments, many Armenian monuments that were targeted by the Turkish army in the earlier parts of the 20th century in order to remove that evidence of Armenian inhabitation of the region. One has to understand the reason why, behind the collapse of the Turkish or the Ottoman Empire, the response to that multi-ethnic chaos and carnage was to try to build a new Turkish identity, a monolithic identity. And in that narrative, there was no room for Armenians, Greeks, Kurds, or whatever, or Arabs, or whatever were parts of the new state. So it was obvious to try to eliminate the traces. Today, however, there's a different Turkish policy, and I'm not talking about all the complicated things going on internally in Turkish politics. The Turkish government has for more than a decade now transformed its attitude towards Armenian heritage. It's quite keen to preserve it for various reasons, for tourism, for also to try to improve its image towards the Armenian issue. The Armenian government is reluctant but also very keen to see this happen. And in this context, it was a major breakthrough when in 2012 the Turkish government nominated the walled medieval city of Ani, which is an Armenian, basically, or mainly an Armenian site, for World Heritage status, and that was granted last year. The Turks used the Armenian narrative as part of the argument for having the site nominated. So that was sort of a very positive move. And during most of the last decade, international efforts have been going on to support the preservation of Armenian heritage in Turkey, among them this walled city. The Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been one of the actors, not the biggest one, but is now sponsoring a joint Turkish-Armenian exhibition to be shown both in Yerevan and in Istanbul, and quite likely also elsewhere. Oh, sorry. I just want to give you an idea of what it looks like. This is through one of the gates, and it's a huge cathedral which remains, most of it remains, inside of Ani. These are examples of other monuments which are around Ani. The exhibition will focus on the unique qualities and contributions of medieval Armenian ecclesiastical and monastic architecture. The multiple sources of this architecture, you could say, it carries the influences from East and West, and it also has inspired Western Gothic. And then the multicultural aspects of the Armenian city of Ani as a trade hub, and the monuments which are within and beyond its walls. It will also focus on the technical challenges of the efforts to preserve the Armenian heritage, the value and result of Turkish-Armenian cooperation, and raise awareness and willingness to further support the efforts by the international community. I want to show you a picture of the scale. This is taken from the Armenian side of the border, which is a militarized zone. You can't go in there unless you have a special permission. It's guarded by the Russians. I went in some years ago with a special permission that did not include the allowance to take pictures, but I couldn't help it. When the Russian officer had gone, I took some photos. So you see, it's a vast complex. When you come to the Turkish side of the border, you see these huge, impressive walls. Some of them are heavily restored, but the scale of them are correct. It's a vast territory. You really walk for hours there. So it's a huge urban wasteland. But if you see it from above, by satellite, in the winter, you can see how densely structured it is. You can really see this is an urban place. It was abandoned sometime during the 14th to 17th century, gradually abandoned. So this is not sort of any evidence of ethnic cleansing or anything like that. It's just an abandoned medieval city which holds an enormous archaeological potential and touristic potential as well. It is a very hybrid place also. For the Armenians, it's essential to talk all the time about the Armenianness of this place. And it is very Armenian, but it's also other things. Anatolia's first mosque was built here, or rather it was sort of a reuse of a building which had served other purposes. And there's been a huge discussion all the time. Was this a mosque or was it a bishop's palace originally? And there's a huge fight between Armenian and Turkish positions on this. But the Turkish are going to modify the signboards which are there to sort of suit a more, let's say, inclusive narrative about what the origin of the monuments were. There's evidence of Seljuk and Iranian influences also in this very diverse and rich architecture. So we want to try to highlight these things. But it's very difficult to work in the political environment which is so important for Armenian heritage in Turkey. Both of the governments are wary of potential domestic political backfiring. There are quite a few toxic issues that could stop or change the heritage politics relating to Armenian monuments on Turkish soil. First is the genocide issue. Whenever there is a genocide resolution made by the German parliament or by the French National Assembly, there is a huge setback. There's also then the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. The Turks are sort of on very close terms with the Azeris. So if the conflict becomes hot, which it might very well become quite soon, then that will stop also probably the cooperation on heritage. Then there's the Kurdish issue, which is very complex, and I'm not going into that. But it is an issue which might, the region where there are most Armenian heritage is also the Kurdish regions of Turkey, so it's extremely volatile there. It's unsafe to be there. I was there in 2014 near the Syrian border, and it was very tense. And the Kurds were sort of furious with the fact that they could not cross the border and join the fighting against the Assad regime. Then there's the major border issue, which is the Turkish fear of an Armenian claim to what they consider West Armenia, which is on Turkish soil. This is probably not going to happen, but it's a great fear among the Turks, which sits in them from the time of the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Then there's, of course, the Armenian domestic politics, which is influenced heavily by the diaspora, which does not want to see too much cooperation with the Turks before the Turks have kneeled down and recognized the genocide as a historical fact. And the Turkish domestic politics, which also is very complicated because there's a nationalistic discourse which does not want any sort of admittance of guilt in the Armenian genocide. So all of these themes are things we're going to avoid. We want to focus on the technical issues because that's what they can talk about. They cannot talk about who destroyed the Armenian monuments, why were they destroyed. They can talk about how do we salvage them. And not all the destruction, of course, is caused by intent. Much of it is by reuse of building material, as we've discussed earlier, and much of it is by seismic activity. It's a very seismic area. But of course, the fact that this has not been a heritage that the Turks wanted has also helped destroying a lot of monuments. The pictures, I should just say, are the one on the top left. That's the national monument in the central square in Istanbul, and the gathering there is to celebrate another legacy from the conflict inherited from the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. That's Cyprus, the occupation of northern Cyprus being celebrated by the old officers. They are there with Turkish Cypriotic flags. On the right-hand side is the national monument in Yerevan for the genocide. And below, and below is a picture from 2014 from the border region in eastern Anatolia, the border region towards the Syrian border, where there was a heavy military presence, and people got killed there in fight with the police while we were there. So we will avoid all those themes, and we want to emphasize Ani as everybody's heritage and as a platform for dialogue across closed borders, both the physical and the mental borders which exist. The picture here is a young Turkish schoolgirl on excursion to Ani, using her phone to take photos of Christian fresco, the Mise en Tombeau of Christ, and So it just shows that today many Turks are relating to this type of heritage as also theirs, and that's a very positive thing. So I'm hopeful that the exhibition will come on, and that it will help also promote the idea that these two countries can cooperate, even if they don't do it officially. It's heritage experts that work together in order to solve technical issues. And when they start talking about technical issues, they go on to talk about what happened. They can talk about that. They can talk about the genocide. So maybe it will come one day also in the official channels. Thank you.